Welcome back, everyone, to another recap series. I arrived in Iceland yesterday, and today I just played my first round of the Reykjavik Open. This is a very strong tournament, very big tournament. It's one of the most renowned open tournaments in the world. I'm the 60-something seed. I'll just show the pairings real quick. Ivanchuk is the first seed. There's a ton of grandmasters here. And yeah, the first round, I played a low-rated opponent, Charan Sai Kalari Hari from India. Apologies if I butchered the name. But pairings went up about 5 hours before the first round. So I actually had a decent amount of time to prepare. Let me hide the notation just to avoid spoilers. And I ended up playing an opening in this game that I've never played before. And I only discovered this opening around 3 a.m. this morning because I was really jet lagged. I couldn't sleep. And this was even before pairings went up this morning. What I was doing was just playing through recent miniatures from Grandmaster games. And I stumbled upon a game from Michael Bluebaum. He was playing the black pieces. He had this position, and he played a move that I just had never seen before. It was knight to c6. And he won like a really nice quick game as black. And this is yeah, just a super rare move against Catalan. We can see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Knight c6 is the seventh most popular move. Now, several months ago, I actually played a line pawn h6, which is an even more rare line. But knight c6, it's still kind of just a surprise weapon. And I'll try and explain the idea behind this move. My opponent developed normally, as you do in the Catalan. And at first in this position, it looks like the knight and bishop are misplaced because the bishop is just staring at these pawns, which are very solid. The knight is obstructing the c-pawn from moving, which very often likes to move in these structures. But the point of having the knight and bishop here is that there's lines where, let's say white plays knight c3, black can take and then very quickly prepare e5. And after queen a4, e5, this is one of the main lines of my preparation. Now, we didn't go into this. We went into a different line, which I was still a little bit prepared for. After pawn b3, I played the move pawn to a5. Now, I had this position on my computer this morning. This was either the Blue Bomb game or there was another game with Andraken. This may have been Andraken's game. We had the black pieces. And it was the only game ever to feature pawn a5. I'm curious if this has ever been played on Lichess. Okay, I'll have to take that back. There's been over 100 games played on Lichess. Any games in the Masters database? Uh-oh, did we break the Masters database? Oh no, my Lichess. Oh no, it's reconnecting. Hey, we're reconnected. Okay, no games in the Masters database, but there is definitely an Andraken game. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, so the point of pawn a5 is to expand with pawn a4 and try and create some weaknesses on the queen side. Now, my opponent played bishop b2. I played pawn a4. This is still pre-game prep, but I didn't really know much beyond here. The only thing I knew is that if white plays queen c2 or knight d2, black can get away with pawn a3 and disturb the bishop and later go for knight e4 and f5 and get some stonewall setup. That didn't happen because my opponent played pawn c5, and this was a new move for me. And I opened the window, but the window is opening further because there's wind. Let me close it before it gets too cold. Yeah, weather is kind of cold outside. It is Iceland in late March, but trying to stay warm. So my opponent played pawn c5. I drop back to e7, and this is another kind of ugly looking thing about this line is when white plays c5, it just looks like white's grabbing so much space. But very often b6 will come and I'll be able to trade off the pawn. And that happened after pawn takes pawn, b6 takes and takes. We got to a position where I am down a pawn, but white has these kind of weak double a pawns. So I thought this was a nice kind of positional gambit. Once I got to this position, I thought the opening was a success, but as we'll see, it was still very much a fight from this position. My opponent played knight c3. I played knight a5, eyeing the c4 square for the knight. Opponent plays knight e5. preventing knight c4 if I play this and there's takes and there's this classic pin along the long diagonal. So instead of blundering a knight, I go ahead and try and trade the knights with knight d7. And then my opponent played a move which I think I underestimated. I was aware of this move, but then once he played it, I realized that I might be in some trouble. Pawn to e4. This is a very thematic move. White's trying to open up the center while I'm still very much behind in development. And if we just see the placement of White's pieces compared to my pieces, it should really benefit White to open the center. Now, I didn't dare take the pawn because that would open the long diagonal and the beast would come alive from g2. So instead, I took the knight on e5, and after pawn takes knight, I play pawn d4. So I'm trying to keep the center closed, but in doing this, I am overextending my d-pawn. Now there's 3 attackers against the pawn, and the only way to defend it is to move forward even more. So I play pawn d3. And yeah, I really didn't know what was going on in this position. I decided to enter this because it looked really interesting and just rich with ideas. But at the same time, I'm taking a big risk because I'm already down a pawn, and I might lose this pawn if I'm not careful. And my opponent played a move which I didn't quite see coming, even though it's a very natural move. Rook to c1, simple idea, rook c3, and it looks like White's going to win the pawn, no problem. So I spent some time here just wincing at my position. And then I considered a move which looks really, really ugly. And I almost just rejected this move right away because how ugly it looks. But then I realized it's probably my best try is to play knight to b7, retreating my only, or one of my only developed pieces. But the idea is to play knight to c5, defending and also pressuring the a-pawn, unleashing the rook. So I was happy when I came up with this because White's still under some pressure, like how to actually deal with the pawn on d3. But then my opponent plays knight d6, and this is a very clever move because I can't get away with taking on d6. If takes, whatever I take back with, there's e5, and I'm losing material. There's all these tactics with the diagonal opening up. So knight d6 was a very resourceful move, trying to make both bishops come alive along the long diagonals. This window keeps opening. I don't know if I can lock it somehow. I'll have to figure that out later. But what happened here? Oh yeah, so instead of taking the knight, I just ignored the knight. And I play knight c5, defending the pawn. Opponent plays bishop d4, attacking the knight, threatening to take and then win the pawn. But then I play bishop a6, so things are getting even more confusing. I have 2 pieces defending the pawn. I have ideas of d2, attempting to win a rook. But at the same time, White has a knight on d6, and we're both kind of in each other's faces, just with this setup and this setup. Now, the thing I should note about the situation, I had a huge time advantage. My opponent was already following below 10 minutes at this point, and I still had over an hour. So on the clock, I was doing quite fine. But then he played a move which I, again, didn't quite see coming, pawn a5, which looks like a very powerful move. It looks like this is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. But thankfully, I'm not a camel, and I have a strong back. And I didn't panic, and I took on d6, with the idea that I'm just getting initiative, and after pawn takes g6, queen takes e6, I'm hitting the bishop, and it seems like the tactics are working out for black. I'm really curious to check with the engine because I still don't know what's happening in this position, but my idea in the game is that if White goes for this move, or no, what am I saying? If White goes for this move, then I would take, and then if White wins a rook, I'm happy to just give up the exchange, and then we would get a position like this. Black has 2 connected passed pawns. I think Black is very close to winning this position. I might be wrong with evaluation, but it looked very fun to play this from the Black side. So instead of going into that, my opponent played bishop to e3. Now this allows pawn to d2, and I'm able to win material. But it's still not so simple because after queen d2, we trade queens. I win the rook on f1, king takes f1, And then I'm in a situation where I have to deal with the issue on the queen side. My pawn is tied down to defending the knight. Nothing's defending my pawn. And there's not an easy way to to solve my problems here. On top of everything, white's threatening e5 to hit the rook and unleash the light squared bishop. So I started thinking for a while. I probably had about an hour when we reached this position. I thought for maybe about 15 minutes. I should note my opponent had about 2 minutes at this point, so he was like already very, very low on time. And as I was still thinking, he gets up and leaves the board. Now, I was in a weird situation because I knew he was going to just use the toilet, and the toilet was pretty far away. So once he left the board and he was walking like very quickly, so I knew he wasn't going to turn back. I had to make a split second decision. Do I keep thinking and try and calculate everything? Or do I play a move as quickly as possible and maybe try and go for the dirty flag? It was a very weird psychological moment because it shouldn't be right to just leave the board when you have 2 minutes left. And after having thought for 15 minutes, I already had like a decent idea of what my plan was. So I decided to go ahead and like as he was walking away, I played the move pawn e5. And then his clock started ticking. And it ticked down to below a minute, and he still was nowhere in sight. Then he fell below 30 seconds, still nowhere in sight. And my heart was beating fast because I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I probably would have felt bad if he were to flag. And then once he got to below about 20 seconds left, he appeared from the corner of the room and he was speed walking back to the board. And he got back with like 10 seconds left. And he was just in time to play the move king to e2, which was actually not the move I was the most concerned about. I was most concerned about pawn takes b6. And I was going to play knight e6 here, and I think black is still for choice, but I don't think it's a clear win. The idea is to play rook here and eventually win the pawn or this pawn. But once he played king e2, then I'm able to play knight e6 and get tempo with knight d4 check. But it still wasn't that simple because after pawn takes pawn, I start with rook b8. Now both pawns are hanging. He's living on the 30-second increment. He plays bishop to e3. I take on a2, plays king to e1. And now here it looks really tempting to start with knight d4, just obstruct the bishop, and then just go after the pawn, like rook b2 and take the pawn. But I'm pretty sure knight d4 is a losing move for black because white can take, and then play b7. And I don't think there's any way to stop rook c8. And there's all these back rank issues with the pawn promoting. So thankfully I saw that. I didn't blunder into this line. Instead I played king to f8, ensuring I don't have back rank issues. And after he played bishop to h3, then I obstruct the bishop. And here it looks like I'm winning the pawn, except I'm not because he has rook c8, takes, and the pawn is guaranteed to come to b7. Now, upon entering this position, I had to be extra sure that I still have good winning chances. And basically at this point, I had seen until the end of the game because what ended up happening, I start with rook b2, force pawn b7, and then check on c2, trade the bishop for the knight. And once I saw that we were going to get this position, then the winning idea for black is actually quite nice. I very simply walk up with the king, and white's completely stuck. And eventually, white's going to be in some sort of zugzwang position where white's just going to run out of moves and have to self-destruct. And as we see what happened in the game, okay, I start with rook b3, chase the king back, walk my king up, and white was just waiting. I got my king to d4, and slowly but surely, white's just running out of moves. At some point, the king has to walk away from e3. Of course, if the bishop ever moves, I win the pawn. So I got my king all the way in, reinforced g5, played rook b2, and in this position, it's zugzwang. White either has to abandon the f-pawn or the b-pawn. Opponent played a few more moves, queened actually on b8, but then my rook comes back and I target the f-pawn. Actually, here there's a nice kind of waiting move, rook to c1, which prompted resignation from my opponent, because it's another situation. White just has no good moves. If bishop g2, I would play rook g1, and then the king has to move. My king will get into f2, and it's just paralysis for white in this position. So yeah, rook c1 was the final move. Opponent resigned, and I got the first round win. It was a crazy game. I'm really not sure what was happening in the opening. Um, I'm really curious to check with the engine, but at the same time, dinner is closing in a half hour, and the restaurant is like a 15-minute walk away. So I think I'll leave it a mystery what the engine says. I didn't even have time to check it before recording this recap. But if you're curious what the engine says, I will leave a link to a Lichess study in the video description so you can analyze the game on your own. And be sure to stay tuned for more recaps. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm going to try and post recaps throughout the event. There are 8 more rounds. I think there's a good chance I'll play a Grandmaster tomorrow. So let me get out of here. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more.